in my soul, I felt so deeply that he was not going to be exceptional and that he was not going to be spared these outcomes. I knew in my soul that their story was going to be his story. Like, it wasn't, you know, some of the doctors, they could sort of say, well, but every baby's different and there's got to be a spectrum and he's probably could do better. And I was just like, no, I know it's weird, but I just knew that that was not going to be the case. I remember also when we learned with the bronchoscopy about the 50%, like sort of that his bronchioles were 50% too small or 50% closed. And so that gave me information about like what a respiratory infection would mean for Vigo. Yeah. When other children were hospitalized for 40 days for a respiratory infection, what would that mean for him with his bronchioles? And that was also really helpful, obviously, to start to understand what this is going to look like. I think when some of the things about how the trach were presented to us, if I was just in a hopeful sort of naive mind, which I was at the beginning, it sounded like if he got a trach, he wouldn't have to go to the hospital when he got a respiratory infection. Like, it sort of sounded like that would fix the problem, right? Fix the respiratory problem. So if he got a cold, we just keep him home, and it was going to be easier, and there were going to be less infections and less hospitalizations. And what I learned from quizzing nurses and doing my own research was that it's the opposite is true. There's more hospitalizations. There can be longer respiratory infections that colonize the lungs that never ever go away. And maybe if you're dealing with somebody who has a normal immune system, but just like a muscular problem, that might look different. But with a child who is prone to severe respiratory infections and has smaller bronchioles, it's going to be really dangerous. And again, I had to connect those dots. Like, no one else did that for me. But then on the backside, people were like, I would have made the same decision.
Yeah, it's like they didn't want to tell us before, but then after we made the
decision, if that was my baby, I would have made the same decision. Yeah, and I'm like, where were you when I was lost sleep for 3 weeks straight?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is a very interesting thing, right? Is to have medical professionals like who see death all the time, who see, you know, and they don't want to bias you, and maybe they could even get in trouble for sharing too much of their opinion, right? But then after we would make a decision, they'd say, that's a decision I would have made for my child as well. Like, I've seen X, Y, Z, and it's like, whoa, that would have been good to know ahead of time.
XYZ was not in your, it was not in your trach education camp.
Or not just, I mean, not just trach, but
no, it wasn't just that, right?
Any sort of decision when we're discussing interventions versus palliative, the majority of the time, unless they were like on a mission, which some doctors it felt like there were, like their only mission in life is just to do whatever it takes to save a life, right? Regardless of the context, regardless of everything, they're only there, like they're very mission driven, and it's very admirable. And I imagine they're great mechanics at solving the one part of the body that they work on. But most doctors afterwards would say, like, you know, if my kid was going through this is the way that I would want them to live their life as well. And it's like, it's too bad that for whatever reason, you can't give that information before to help not bias, but inform my decision. Because I don't have the same vantage point that you do. I haven't seen 20 kids come through here with a similar condition and struggle and have very uncomfortable lives before they eventually pass.